Hey, what's going on, everyone? Ryan again with RPKcustoms.com. This video is going to be all about how to assemble my new spinning emitter V2 kit. These are going to be available on my website on May 4th. So if you're interested, keep an eye out for those. But right now, I'm going to be going over what is included in my kit and the tools you are going to need to assemble this kit. So first off, the main body. And you can see it has been weathered and the stencils have been applied. These are the stencils that I made specifically for this run. So they are all going to be exactly the same. You have the emitter with the accurate emitter dings. You have the emitter nipple. The rod that holds the emitter on. And this has also been modified. I don't know, see if I can zoom in. You can see right there the little half moon chip out of the rod. And you are also going to get a little pack of hardware. And I'm going to be including gaff tape, gaffer's tape in with my kit. So you will not have to source that separate. Now, as far as tools, you are going to need a Dremel. And this is for grinding the tabs off of the inside of the clamp. If you do not have a Dremel, I highly recommend getting one. They're pretty cheap nowadays. You can get one at Harbor Freight for around $10, $10 to $15, depending on where you're at, and if you can score a good deal on a sale. This is one of the first tools that I ever had when I started out building lightsabers, and I still use it to this day. So a Dremel is an invaluable tool. I highly recommend getting one. You're going to need a needle file set, and I'm just going to be using the square one out of the set. I'm not going to be using any of the other ones. But again, a needle file set is a really good thing to have on hand if you are in this hobby. You are also going to need a set of Allen keys. I am also going to be using a small tape measure. This is not a necessity, but just to make things go a little bit easier for the video, I'm going to be using one of those. I've also got some rubber gloves and some safety glasses for grinding off the tabs inside the clamp. So, parts that you are going to need to order for this kit. Now, like I said, this is a kit, so it does not come with everything. I'm doing it like this so that I can support other people in the community. I don't want to offer everything, especially when other people make really good parts, like Wanawanga's cone knob. These things are a fantastic replica. So I felt like there was really no need for me to replicate one if there was already a really good replica on the market. And that goes for the Wanawanga boot stud and the D-ring. And like I said, the clamp card is from Sloth Furnace. And you are going to need a clamp. My kit does not come with a clamp. I recommend a Roman Props, the Bright Satin, I believe it is, or the Graflex Shop. Both clamps are really nice quality and really accurate to a vintage. I am also going to be using a little bit of aluminum black. Again, this is not really required, but if you want it to look more like the prop does today, then you might want to pick some of this up. This is pretty cheap. I think it was $6 on Amazon for this little bottle. Oh, and I almost forgot the pommel. And you can see the pommel is also damaged. And you can see my little machining mark in there. And I tried to weather the pommel as accurately as I could to the reference photos that are available. So you can see the little nicks out of the pommel cube there. All right, so we're going to get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I am going to be sanding the tabs off of the inside of the clamp. I'm going to grind one off, and then I'm going to probably cut the rest of the video of me grinding the other ones out, just because, you know, I don't want you guys to have to sit there and listen to me grinding on something for a few minutes. So, put my glasses on. I am using just a old stone grinding bit. You can use the sanding drums. Those will work fine. It really doesn't take much to sand the tabs off of these because I'm pretty sure this is just like a mild steel. Let's get started. My Dremel has two settings, low and high. I'm just going to be using low. And I'm going to try to get this on camera the best I can. It's kind of awkward to work and film at the same time. Okay. You can see that tab is completely gone now, and that didn't take too long at all. I do recommend taking a little bit of sandpaper after all of these are ground down and just kind of sanding that smooth a little bit so that it does not scratch your hilt when you slide it down onto the clamp section. But we'll get into that here in a minute. So I'm going to sand the other tabs off. I'm probably going to cut this part out, so I will see you in a second. All right, we got all the tabs ground off now. And like I said before, I am going to use just a little bit of sandpaper. This is 320 grit. This is not necessary, but it is good practice just because you want to minimize the scratching on the hilt when you're putting this on. I do like to slide these down over the main body instead of wallowing out this clamp hole so that the lever can spin all the way around. I really don't like that setup. I've done it before in the past, but I have kind of moved away from doing that. And but I'll be going over that here in a little bit. And you don't have to sand much. You just want it to feel smooth to the touch. And those feel pretty good. So now is the needle file. Take those off for a second. So you can see, hopefully you can see, by grinding that off, you end up having this little burr right there on the inside of the square hole of the clamp, right where my finger is. And you just want to take a needle file to break that little burr off. So it's not too hard. It's a pretty thin burr, so that's really all you need. Just a couple little strokes and that burr goes away. Just like that. So you can see the difference between this one and this one. So I'll do the other three. That looks pretty good. Clamp is pretty much done. I'm going to be disassembling the clamp because I have to take the nut out of the clamp bar here. It's kind of a pain to take that little nut out of these new clamp bars. They used to just slip right out, but yeah, these new ones you have to kind of destroy this clamp bar just to get that nut out. So I am going to be including in my kit a little square nut so that if you do not want to destroy your clamp bar or it's a little bit too difficult for you, you can just use the nut provided. I'm going to have to take this and put it in a vise to pry that nut out of there. So I will just show you guys, if you've never disassembled a Graflex clamp before, I will show you how to do that now. You just squeeze the two sections together like that. Unthread the lever. Just like that. Now you want to save your square washer. Don't lose that because you're going to need it. And you are going to need this side of the clamp bar with the square hole. So set that aside. And there is the square nut that we need right there. And I'm going to have to go put this in my vise and pry that out of there. Like I said, it's kind of a pain. So if you do not want to do that, you can just use the square nut that I provide. So I'm going to go do that, and I'll be back in a second. All right, we are back. We got the square nut out of the back of the clamp bar. And this is what I had to do to get that nut out of the clamp bar. It actually wasn't too bad. This one wasn't. I've had some of these that are pretty difficult to get out, but if you have a vise and a pair of good pliers, you should be able to get this out no problem. And I'll show you the difference between the nut that I'm going to include versus the nut out of the clamp bar. So there you can see the difference. The nut that I'm going to include is a little bit bigger. And that is why I prefer to take the nut out of the clamp bar itself. Okay, one thing that I forgot to include in the parts that you are going to need is a V2 lever. This is a lever from my old kits, so I'm just going to be using this one. Again, Wanawanga has a really nice, really accurate lever that is chrome plated. This one is just an aluminum lever. But the Wanawanga ones are essentially the same shape. It's a little bit different down through here, but they do look very similar. I actually have a Wanawanga lever on my personal V2, and you can see how close they are. And I've got a bunch of my rust compound put on there, so it looks a little beat up. Okay, so let's assemble the clamp. You're going to need your sidebar with the square hole, and that goes on this side, the side that has the elongated hole. So it's going to go right like that. And you are going to need your square washer. Going to put it just like that. And you are going to need your extracted nut. And that's going to go right in here. I'm going to try to get this on camera the best I can. This can be kind of awkward. You might have to fiddle with it a little bit, but you will be able to do it. Once it's done, you won't have to mess with it again. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I think I got everything lined up. You can see light through the hole. So what I typically do is just put my thumb on it and squeeze it together. Run your lever through the hole, or the threaded rod for the lever. And I think it grabbed. Let's see. we are in business. This is a little bit easier to do if you have a small vise. You can put this in the vise and squeeze the clamp together. That way you only have to worry about lining up the hole and the threaded rod. But I've put a lot of these together, so I just use my hands now. All right, so now that we have the lever on, let's see how it fits over this. Now, like I said before, I like to do this without wallowing this hole out, the square hole. When you do that, the lever can spin freely. And oh, we got our washer on a little crooked. So let's squeeze this. Take our Allen key here, just for something small to manipulate. There we go. Okay, that's fixed. So like I was saying, I like to keep that square hole intact without wallowing it out. I do not like when the lever is able to free spin, because when it is assembled, it can come down and rub on your booster section, and I really don't like that. So I'll show you on my personal V2. It does not spin all the way around, and it cannot touch the booster section. That's as far down as it'll go. And that is why I designed my new V2 with a removable emitter. On top of the fact that the spinning emitter is accurate to the V2 anyway. So, we're doing the lever. We have to test fit this now. You're probably going to have to put this on and off, or take this on and off a couple times to get the perfect fit. But you want to slide it down over this. And you're going to want to line up the rails of the clamp, the middle, to the set screw hole right there. And we'll test it. That actually does not feel too bad, right like that. So I think I'm going to leave it just like this. And we can move on to the next step. All right, so I think the next step is going to be the emitter. There's not really a one good way or one right way to do this. As long as you put the clamp on before the emitter, then it doesn't really matter what order of operations you do things. So we are going to do the emitter next. We have to assemble the rod. And you're going to want to find the end that has the little half moon chip right there. Hopefully you can see that. The other end is just hacked off. So you will be able to tell pretty easily what end is what. And you are going to need the emitter nipple. So the first thing you do is get in your bag of hardware, and you can see this bushing right here. And this is what you're going to need. So this is going to take a little bit of finagling to get it just right, but I'm going to measure it at the end, which is why I have this. So that way you can just measure it and install it, and you don't have to play with it like I am about to. So I'm just backing out the set screw a little bit so the rod can slide through, just like that. So I am going to guess about that far down on the shaft. Tighten that up. That is what it should look like when you put it into your V2 body. So we're going to set that aside because we need the washer. And this washer runs in between the two thin necks of the emitter and the main body. So it is going to sit just like that. right in between there. And that's what's going to give you the gap in the neck. You can see that that hole is just big enough for the bushing. And you just got to play with it a little bit in order to get that down the hole. Just like that. That's what it should look like. Then you take your washer, slide it over the shaft. Take your emitter. Slide that down just like that. Then your emitter nipple. And you can see we are about 1/4 of an inch too long. So I'm going to take this rod out and readjust it just a little bit. Reinstall everything. And that looks just about perfect. So now I can put the set screws in, but before I do that, I'm going to take this back out and measure it so that you guys do not have to play with it like I just did. So you are looking at almost 3.5 inches from the top of the bushing here to the end of the shaft. Looks like it's exactly 3.5 inches on my end. The camera's not picking it up too well. So that's what you need. The amount you need for your shaft. Let's reassemble this. Washer. Get something to, whoops. Get something to poke the shaft down as far as it'll go. Just like that. Okay, so now that we have that assembled, we have to go into our bag of hardware, and we need the set screws out of here. Okay, I transferred all of the hardware into this little clear container here just so it'd be easier to access. So pick this back up. Make sure everything is adjusted right. Now, I typically like to put the first set screws in the emitter nipple. That way it will hold the emitter on and you won't have to sit here and hold it. And juggle multiple things at once. So here we go. And you want to make sure that these holes are lined up. So you can see that set screw hole is lined up with this set screw hole. Which doesn't really matter right now because the emitter still spins. So you can see, even though you cannot take the emitter off, the emitter still does spin freely from the emitter nipple. So if you want to lock that down now, you can, and that will make the other side just a little bit easier. So it looks like we're lined up. And you do not have to over tighten this, just make them snug and that'll work good. Now you can see that the set screw, hopefully you can see, the set screw is not sticking out a little bit like it should. And that is why I have included 8 of these smaller set screws. That way one set can be more decorative. Just like that. All right, let's do the other side. And our emitter is now installed. You can see it spins nice and free, no hangups. Okay, let's move on to the pommel. I'm going to have to install the D-ring on that before we can actually insert it and attach it to the rest of the hilt. So, like I said, these D-rings are from Wanawanga. KR Sabers also has a really good D-ring, but I figured since I was ordering everything from Wanawanga that I would just pick up a Wanawanga D-ring. So, you are going to need to trim off about a 1/16 of an inch on either side of these. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to clamp this down all the way, and it's going to look a little bit too spread out. So I am just going to be using the nippers on this pair of needle nose pliers. It's probably not the best way to do it. If you have a bigger pair of pliers, that would be the best. You can also use something like a hacksaw or a belt sander. Every once in a while, I will take these out and just sand them down on my belt sander, but not everybody has a belt sander, so I'm just doing the simplest method that I can think. That way, people don't get too discouraged thinking they need fancy tooling. So you can see that I spread it apart a little bit, and I am just going to eyeball it. And you can see that looks like it's probably roughly 1/16 of an inch. So it takes a little bit of grip strength to be able to cut these with a pair of pliers, but it's not that bad. Do the other side. And that's it. Now you can take your needle file or a piece of sandpaper. In this case, I am just using a nail file. And you're just going to sand the two ends down just so there's no sharp edges. You want the D-ring to be able to move freely in the pommel cube and not get hung up. That feels pretty good. So I'll do the other side. And that feels pretty good. So it should look like this when you are done. And now what I usually do is put this in a vise and clamp it down. That way I don't have to worry about this slipping out of a pair of pliers and scratching the pommel in an inaccurate way. So I'm going to go do that, and I will be right back. Okay, I decided to just set the camera up and show you exactly how I'm going to do this. So you can see, hopefully, I have the D-ring in the pommel cube, and I have a small little vise attached to my desk in my office, so I'm going to use that. Now you're going to have to kind of play around with this a little bit to get it just right, but once you get it just right, all you have to do is clamp it down. So you might see me struggling for a few minutes, but I'll get it eventually. All right, so that wasn't too bad. I got it. You just want to make sure that the D-ring is going straight into both holes, because if not, you are going to mar up the hole for the D-ring, and you don't want to do that. So looks like I'm straight in the hole, and now you just want to tighten it down. You don't want to tighten too much. Don't really reef on it, because you are going to run the risk of deforming the D-ring. You want that kind of circular, accurate D-ring shape that the V2 D-ring has. So you want to tighten it. You want to move this back and forth just to make sure it is nice and loose in there. Take that out and see how that looks. Okay. Now you can see that when you move it back and forth, that there is still a gap right here, and that bothers me. So I'm going to put this back in the vise and tighten it down just a little bit more. Okay, now I felt the vise stop when I was tightening that, so that's the cue that both ends have touched and it can no longer be clamped down anymore. If you do clamp it down anymore, you are going to deform the D-ring. And like I said, you do not want that to happen. So that's as tight as we can get it. And now, when you move that back and forth, you cannot see a gap, which is just how I like it. So we're going to roll with that. All right, we are back up on my desk with the D-ring installed. Now we need to install the boot stud. And before we install it, we are going to have to modify it, because on the original prop, if you look at the reference photos, it does not have these little quarter circles on each side of the boot stud. So we're going to have to grind that off. I am just going to be using my Dremel once again. All right, and you want it so it is just even with the face of the side of the boot stud. So we removed one. I'm going to do the other three, and then I'll be back. Okay, I have taken down all four sides. Hold on, let me turn the light on so you guys can actually see. I've taken down all four sides. They're a little rough. I'm going to hit this with a little bit of Scotch-Brite to kind of blend the sides in so that they look kind of smooth. And then we are going to have to modify the little prongs right here so that it fits into the pommel. And you don't have to spend much time doing this. I'm just doing it for good measure. Because once you weather this, it is going to blend everything together and make it look rough anyway. So don't worry if it doesn't look 100% perfect, because the weathering is going to hide a lot of the imperfections. So it's not showing up the best on camera, but it is a little bit more blended together. So these are made from steel, and the way I typically weather these is with gun bluing. But there is a way to weather these without gun bluing if you do not want to purchase something like this. Walmart carries this a lot of times if you do want to use super glue. You might be able to find it at Walmart. Again, Amazon, you can find them for probably around $6 a bottle. It's really helpful for other aspects of lightsaber parts. Between aluminum black and super blue, you can do a lot or most of your weathering needs. Aluminum black obviously blackens aluminum. Super blue blues steel. So I'm going to be using the gun bluing. However, if you do not want or have gun bluing, you can use white vinegar. You can soak this in white vinegar. You're probably going to have to let it sit overnight to get a good patina on it. But the acid from the vinegar will weather your boot stud. But I am going to just dip it in the super blue, and you can see how fast this stuff works. So I'm just going to grip it like this. And just dip it in there, and you can see it is black. So you want to wipe it off with a paper towel. And you can see how black and weathered that looks. And I am actually going to hit it with a little bit of Scotch-Brite. This is machining Scotch-Brite, by the way. This is super cheap. You can get this on Amazon. And again, this is something really good to have if you are getting into building or modifying lightsabers. So this stuff is really good to have, lasts for a long time. So I'm just going to give it a couple of light passes with some Scotch-Brite, and you can see that it gives it a really nice vintage look. Okay, so now we are going to have to modify the prongs of this so that it fits nicely into the pommel, which our pommel is right here. And you can see that's as far as I can get it in without modifying. So we are going to have to cut the prongs a little bit. And then we are going to have to sand around the prongs to get a good fit. Again, I'm going to be using my Dremel for that. Okay, now that we have our boot stud prongs ground down a little bit, and it fits nicely in our pommel, we can now glue this in. And I'm going to be using E6000. You can use epoxy. You can use super glue if you want. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't really need a lot of glue to stay in there. But I like E6000 because it's kind of a rubbery, almost like a hot glue. So you don't have to worry about bumping into this and the glue letting loose like you would with maybe a super glue or something that gets really, really hard. And you don't need much. You just need a dab. So I just have a little dab right on the end. Like I said, you do not need much. If you put too much on and you try to push this in the hole, it's going to seep out the sides and you're going to be able to see the glue. So, well, actually, let's put a little tiny bit more on. The only thing with E6000 is that it's kind of stringy, which can make it a pain to work with. Okay. And that's what my little glob looks like. And just be sure when you're putting this in not to get it on the sides of the hole, because like I said, it can seep out. And right like that. And that looks pretty good. And now we're going to have to sit and let this dry for a little bit. So while we're waiting for this to dry, I am going to solder the traces on the clamp card. So I'm going to get all set up and I'll be right back. Okay, we are back. You can see that I drew a little square on my paper, and that's because once I sit down and I start soldering, I cannot see the camera, so I wanted to give myself a point of reference to where I should be holding the clamp card. So I've got some masking tape, and I'm going to sit down, so I'm not going to be able to see the camera after this. Hopefully you guys can see, and you're not just looking at the top of my head. So what I like to do, actually, let me zoom in a little bit. There you go. Don't mind the little blob of super glue. All right, so what I like to do, just to make sure the solder stays on the traces and not on the actual pads, is I like to put a little bit of masking tape over the pads. So the solder does not seep through. Just like that. And I'm going to be soldering pretty much all of this. The masking tape also can hold it in place. All right. Got my soldering iron. It is hot. I've got some flux. You probably don't need flux when you're doing this, just for this, because it's not two wires that are joined together. It's just solder basically for looks, but I'm going to put a little bit on there just so that the solder transfers a little bit easier. So just going to do something like this. Again, this is probably not needed, but better safe than sorry. And with the V2 clamp cards, for the solder, what I like to do is start here at the base and then work my way up. That way, when you get to this round little pad right here, you get the little ball of solder on the end, and it looks more natural. I probably don't need that much. Now your clamp is probably going to be covering this bigger trace right here, so it's not really needed to solder that. But what I do like to do is put a big glob of solder right here on this pad. That way you don't have to worry about putting electrical tape or anything on the back, and that solder, that pad of solder will actually hold the clamp card in the clamp. Otherwise, like I said, you're going to have to put electrical tape on it or something, and the clamp card is just loose if you don't do this. That's good right there. And then I can take my needle file and I can sand that down and adjust it as I need to. Give you guys a close-up. Doesn't look too bad. Looks like I might have missed some right there. And that line that runs all the way across on that trace, that is going to show a little bit. So I want to go back and just touch that up. But other than that, it does not look too bad. Okay. I think we are ready to do the aging process now. We want to age the green circuit board to make it look a little bit more vintage. And I've got a trick that I use to do that. Try to get some of this flux off of here. Okay, so the way that I like to age my circuit cards is just with a black Sharpie. This is just a standard black Sharpie. And what you can do, I got to sit down for this, is color on and wipe it off. Color it on, wipe it off. And you just do this on the whole card. You don't want to let it sit too long because it'll dry. But you can see how that makes the circuit card look nice and aged. So I'm going to do that to the rest down here. And this is a trick that I learned years ago from Matthew Dooley, if you guys remember Matthew Dooley from Graflex Addicts, and his YouTube channel, which I believe is East Coast Sabers, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since Matthew Dooley has posted anything, but his series on Let's Build a Graflex is really good. If you guys have not seen that and you are trying to install a Graflex, you can go check his video out. It's a little bit old, and I think he's using a Graflex 2.0 kit with a Nano Biscotti, but there is still some really good information in there. Okay, and I really like the way this turned out. So I think I'm going to leave it just like this. Now you can see right up in here, there's a little bit where it looks like I didn't get it. But the trick to weathering is you don't want everything to look really uniform. Natural weathering never looks uniform. And the clamp bar is going to cover most of this anyway. It's probably going to cover about that much, so you're not going to be able to see that. You just want to make sure that all of the permanent marker is off of the gold traces, and I think that looks really good. So we're going to roll with that. If, well, let's just see. Want to open your clamp up. Your traces on these should be facing this way. Your gold pads should be on the left. Okay, so you can see this solder pad right here is a little bit too big. I got a little bit too much solder on that pad. So I'm going to take my needle file and I'm going to file just a little bit off of that. And solder is really soft, so it doesn't take much. Let's see how that fits. We need just a little bit more off. And still just a little bit more. Actually, let me use this. I've never used this before. See how that works. Actually, not too bad. Okay. That is perfect. Fits good. Clamp it down. That looks nice. I like the way that turned out. Okay. Now that the clamp card is done, we can move on to the next step. And the next step is going to be, for this video at least, is going to be the cone knob. So I'm going to do just a little bit of weathering on this, just to make it not look brand new. You don't want to over weather it. So I am actually going to be using a 1/2 mixture of aluminum black to water. I don't want to use full strength aluminum black on this because if all of these little knurling patterns in here get too black, it's really hard to get that out. So you want to make sure you go really slow with this, which is why I did a 1/2 mixture. Now, the ideal way to do this is to do it over a sink. That way you can run cool water over it. Cool water will neutralize the aluminum black and rinse off the chemical, which will stop the weathering process. And that's the quickest way to stop. But since I'm filming this, I am just going to be using a cup of water. And I'm going to be applying it with a standard Q-tip. And I'm going to be wearing gloves because I don't want to get this chemical on my skin. Okay. Just dip your Q-tip in there. And like I said, I'm going to be doing this really quick. I don't want this to get too weathered because the cone knob on the original V2 does not look really weathered and beat up. But aluminum does age by itself over time and turns kind of a gray color, so you just want to knock the finish down a little bit. And I think that might be good. Actually, you know what? I almost forgot. On the original prop, on the reference photos, you can see that point on the cone knob is dulled down a little bit. So I'm just going to take my file and I'm just going to knock that point off just like that. You don't want to do it too much. You just want to get that point off. Okay. Get a little bit more aluminum black on my Q-tip. And I think that's about good. Like I said, you don't want it to be too weathered. Just enough to make it look a little old. And I like the way that turned out, so we're done with that. Okay, we can dry the cone knob off. And we are going to have to put a M6 by 10 set screw into the cone knob. Now I know the Wanawanga cone knob does not come with this screw, so you're going to have to go to the hardware store and pick one of these up. I believe this is a, I don't know, half-inch, whatever the metric equivalent of a half-inch is. And that's really all you need to put it into the booster section of your V2. And there we go. We're getting there. Okay. So the next step, I'm going to be adding gaffer tape around the neck. Now you can use a Trooper Trent gaffer tape adapter since this is a spinning emitter. I do not have one of those on hand. I like to set these V2s up kind of how it was in filming Return of the Jedi, where the gaffer tape looks a little bit tighter around the neck. Now, by doing this, obviously the tape is going to stick on both sides and the emitter is not going to be able to spin all the way around, but you're still going to get that nice emitter wobble. So let me zoom out a little bit so you guys can see. I've got this gaffer tape. I like the texture of this gaffer tape. And like I said, I am going to be including some of this in with the kit. So you are not going to have to source any gaffer tape. So let me cut a section off. And we are going to have to cut it lengthways as well. All right, that looks pretty good. So what I usually do to get this gaffer tape on the correct way is hold this upside down. You can adjust the neck however you want it. And that looks pretty good to me right there. So I'm going to hold this upside down and wrap the tape around this way. And you want it just about there, the cut line to be just about there. So we're going to cut there, stick that off to the side. And you can push that down tight. And what I like to do is just take my fingernail and run it along the groove of the neck just a couple times. That way you can actually see where the neck splits. Just like that. And the gaffer tape does not like to stick to itself. So if you want it really tight, you can put just a dab of E6000 or some kind of glue in there just to hold it down. Or if you want it to look more weathered over time, just let it go. That's what I've done with mine, is I'm just kind of letting it naturally unravel. Every once in a while, I'll stick it back down and it'll stay for a little bit, but it will eventually pop back up and look more like how the prop looks today. There we go. I like the way that turned out. So we are going to move on to the next step. And this is going to be the final step, which is installing the pommel. And the glue is not quite dry yet, but that should be okay. We're just going to be very careful. And you want to, actually first let me get into the little cup of hardware. You want the set screw. It looks like that. And I'm going to start it in the hole. Okay, sorry about that. I had to run out and get another set of Allen wrenches. So, need to find which Allen wrench will work for this. That one right there. Okay. So you can see this groove right here. That catches the set screw right there. And you want to clock this so that this pommel cube right here is lined up with the set screw, and your D-ring is off to the left if you're looking at it like this. And that looks pretty good right there. So I'm going to go ahead and crank that down. Just like that. And now we have a fully assembled RPK V2 spinning emitter kit. And from here, if you want to do more weathering on the clamp, add rust, or add, like I said, a Trooper Trent gaffer tape adapter, you can go ahead and do that. I'm not going to be covering that in this video. I just wanted to give a basic rundown of how to assemble one of these kits. So I will take pictures of this and put them in the video probably right now. And this V2 will be up for sale on my website, as well as the first wave of my V2 kits on May 4th at 12 a.m. So I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate your business. I appreciate your support. And may the force be with you.